The Black Ship Side Story, Barony of Sreaming Forests, Day 22. The crew from the Forentis Grand Informant sat in the lounge area of the accommodation and studios. It had been just 17 days since the royal invitation had been issued. Princess Clara, with the assistance of House Forentis, had requested that a news team be sent to the principality, with the two news anchors who had presented the victory at Hastrung. A request from House Forentis would have been cause to respond. A royal request, especially one by the Reaper herself, could not be ignored. Joel Sofer and Zelina Berestein had been asked whether they would accept a minimum of a year's posting to Hago, and both had accepted. This was not the sort of request that a minor news anchor said no to. In just 3 days, not only had the Forentis Grand Informant assembled a team and their equipment, but the shipyards of House Forentis had converted a large cargo barge into living accommodation, complete with a studio, an editing suite, and a full communications setup. Leading the team was the news director, Baronetess Elissa Marshall, but everyone else had been chosen from the many commoners at the Forentis Grand Informant. They had been informed of the current situation in Hago and of the desire for a news company to cover events for the inhabitants of Hago, House Forentis, and beyond. There were undoubtedly risks, but there were also potential opportunities, and as Zelina had said to Joel, when a princess asks for you by name, you would be a fool to say no. In the 2 weeks of travel from the Forentis shipyard attached to the Forentis transport vessel Golden Harvest, the technicians had installed the servers, wired up the editing suites, set up lighting within the onboard studio, and prepared hundreds of other little things. They had bought 3 times the number of spares with them compared to normal outside broadcast suites, and this included the crew, sound and lighting technicians, camera crews, even a couple of makeup artists, because it was important to look your best in a broadcast. On the final day, as they made their way across the Hastrung system towards Hago, they received an unexpected message. Their first interviews were to be with Princess Clara Astor, General Tornell Swallowtail, and Baron Wyatt Staples. Her Royal Highness would come to them, whilst the Baron and the General would be interviewed on the surface of Hago itself. They were given a long list of things not to ask about, mainly not to ask anything that could be considered a military secret, and also to avoid talking about individual families. Beyond that, they were told to prepare and submit a list of questions for each person. As they finally arrived in orbit at Hago, they saw an awesome sight. They were locked onto a standard repair station. However, it was currently under repair itself. In the adjacent dock was a huge Drazen warship, whilst, close enough to see with the naked eye, was the vast Drazen cattle ship. This vessel dwarfed the warship dock and their own vessel. They looked on in awe. Early morning of day 22, Clara's quarters, Nornavio. Cynthia was brushing out Clara's hair. As Clara read through the questions one final time, she could tell whoever had put the list of questions together had been trying really carefully not to offend, perhaps she thought. It would have been better to have placed no restrictions on the questions in advance and simply struck off any she was not willing to answer. Sighing, she connected to the ship's AI, requesting the location of Wyatt. The reply that came back said, "Lieutenant Commodore Staples is in the composter's briefing room." Connecting to Wyatt, Clara asked, "Have you selected pilots for today's press briefing?" Wyatt smiled as he replied, "Yes, Clara. I've given you Raquel again, with instructions not to do anything that will make Cynthia nervous." Clara laughed, and Wyatt carried on. "I will be taking the volunteers down to the surface shortly. Leopold will give me a hand. Then when he's done, he will take the news crew down to the surface, first to Newtown, then to the General when they are done." Clara replied, "Tell the lieutenant I will see her in the hangar in 10 minutes. Then she disconnected. The shuttle journey to the new Forentis Grand Informant studio took less than 15 minutes, including the time spent entering the very small hangar bay, which was barely large enough for a single shuttle. Clara spent the entire time going over the questions and answers on her datapad and didn't say a word the whole time. When they arrived, Princess Clara was invited to the makeup room. Cynthia accompanied her, whilst the 2 Royal Marines Raquel had carried in the main area of the shuttle proceeded to check out the studios. Raquel was invited to wait in a pleasant lounge area that the studio called the Green Room, though she had no idea why. The only green thing it contained was a plant in one corner of the room. However, the seating was comfortable, and there were free refreshments. So she sat and waited. Meanwhile, Princess Clara Astor was being prepared for her interview, sitting in a chair in a room labeled Makeup. A very nervous young woman stood behind her, looking at the brightly lit mirror. Clara was fairly certain that the presence of the armed and armored Lady Cynthia Winfield was probably not helping. Finally, after what felt like forever but was in reality less than 5 minutes, Clara said, "Do you intend to murder me?" The young woman shook her head violently from side to side and stuttered, "No, Your Royal Highness," all the while looking at the armored Lady Cynthia in the mirror. Clara nodded, then said, "Well, if you don't intend to try and harm me, you are quite safe. Why don't you start by telling me your name, then explain why I am sitting in front of this mirror with what feels like a sun pointing at my face?" Gaining a little confidence, the young woman replied, "My name is Claire Montague, Your Royal Highness. We use a bright light around the mirror to show every detail that will appear under studio lights. The camera will show every blemish, even on someone as beautiful as Your Royal Highness." Clara held up a hand and said, "Claire, why don't you just call me ma'am? Otherwise, this may take a very long time indeed." Claire replied, "Yes, ma'am." With Clara nodding her head in approval, Claire continued, "So we use professional makeup, which hides any blemishes and gives you a natural, flawless look despite the lights and cameras." Clara smiled and said, "There, that wasn't so bad, was it? Why don't you continue and explain what you are doing as you do it?" And so for the next nearly 20 minutes, Claire applied the makeup, giving Clara a radiant look that brought a smile to the young princess's face. She finished up by just adjusting a few hairs, then stood back and bobbed a curtsy, adding, "All done, ma'am. I'll summon the floor manager." Claire pressed a button, and within 2 minutes a smart middle-aged man had appeared, introducing himself as Javier. He briefly explained that they had 2 sets available for the interview, and asked Clara to choose which one she preferred. There was a formal situation with a desk between the anchor and the princess, or a more comfortable pair of armchairs set at an angle to each other, with a small, low table between. It was this latter arrangement that Clara selected. Another young woman came over and carefully, as if her life depended on it, attached a tiny microphone to Princess Clara's dress. Once the microphone was connected, Zelina Berestein came over to introduce herself, and they briefly discussed procedures while lighting and cameras were adjusted for the best results. Finally, everything was ready, and the floor manager called out, recording in 3, 2, 1. While Clara was being prepared, Wyatt and Leopold had been busy transporting almost 200 crewmen to Newtown. 2 shuttle trips each had been sufficient. Wyatt was pleasantly surprised at how many volunteers he had managed to get. In reality, they had more than he could use for a single day. So this was the second day of 3, when crewmen and women from all branches had offered to come and paint the children's homes. They had enough scaffolding and enough builders who knew how to assemble it that they could manage to work on about 35 homes each day. The people of Newtown had all agreed to do the children's new homes first, and so a procedure had been worked out. 3 days ago, 35 houses had been set up with scaffolding. Then the houses had been scrubbed down, loose paint removed, any minor repairs made, and the surfaces sanded down. Fortunately, there were plenty of people who could perform these mainly simple tasks. 2 days ago, the first batch of crewmen had come down, each wearing a set of disposable overalls. From 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, they had applied paint to the houses that had been prepared. Then they went to the beach where they were given beer, a barbecue, and ice cream, which apparently went well. At least Wyatt thought to himself, no one got drunk and got themselves in trouble. While the crew partied, the builders had moved the scaffolding to the next 35 homes. It was easier this time, as all of the children's houses were the same basic design in either left or right-handed versions. The scaffolding went faster. Yesterday had been another preparation day, and today more crew were coming to paint and then party. And then, of course, there were the press. Wyatt felt very uncomfortable about the whole being interviewed idea. He was terrified that he might say something to get his friends into trouble, or worse, say something that might get Clara's incoming fleet into trouble. The questions that had been forwarded to him seemed innocent enough, and he knew he could always give an, "I'm sorry, I can't answer that," reply. But there had to be a better way. Rachel had got him into this. Maybe, he thought, she could help get him out of it. He hurried to her office in the town hall, grateful to find she was sitting behind her desk. She looked up as he entered the office, saying, "Can I help you, Wyatt?" Wyatt's reply, "I hope so," caught her attention, and for the next 10 minutes, he explained the situation. Finally, Rachel looked up and asked, "How many people did the Forentis Grand Informant actually send in total?" A small glint now in her eyes. Wyatt had no idea, but a quick message to Raquel, who was still sitting in the green room, soon got a reply. 42. Rachel smiled, then simply said, "Come with me." Back on the Forentis Grand Informant barge, the interview with Clara was coming to an end, and Zelina gave a polite, "Thank you, Your Royal Highness, for taking time out from your busy schedule to grant us this interview." Clara gave her best and brightest smile, saying, "Not at all, Zelina. The people of the Principality have a right to be kept informed of threats to their safety. House Astor will always put aside less pressing matters to come to the aid of those in mortal danger. It was nice to be able to let the people know how we are keeping them safe." Once the microphone was unhooked and Clara had met the rest of the staff, she was eager to leave, but then Raquel passed her a datapad with a message from Wyatt. Reading it, she turned around, spying the news director, Baronetess Alyssa Marshall. She addressed her, saying, "Baronetess Alyssa, Baron Staples has a suggestion. Rather than give a formal interview, he suggests that you all join him for lunch on Hago, after which he will be more than happy to show you around Newtown and let your viewers see some of the things their generosity has paid for." Alyssa Marshall was surprised. She had never expected such an invitation, but she instantly saw the possibilities of such a situation and eagerly accepted, only then asking, "But how will we all get down there?" Princess Clara, still smiling, said, "Baron Staples is sending 2 of his knights and some additional staff with a shuttle to collect you, but that means that I must leave you, as there is only room in your hangar for a single shuttle." With that announcement, she boarded her shuttle with Cynthia and the Royal Marines, and Raquel started to take them back to the Noir Navio. On their way, she had Raquel call Wyatt up on the radio. When he came on the channel, she asked, "Just what do you think you are doing, Baron Staples?" Wyatt's reply caused her to burst out laughing as he said, "According to Lady Rachel, I am taking advantage of a massive amount of free advertising. She says she has a way of improving on the souvenir thing, which she is just about to explain to me." Just over 20 minutes after Raquel had piloted her shuttle away from the news studio, Sir Leopold carefully entered the cramped space. Once inside, Sir Declan and his servants helped ensure that everybody and their equipment were carefully loaded on board before Sir Declan joined Leopold in the cockpit. As Declan closed the hatch, Leopold asked him, "So what's the boss up to, Declan? He hates publicity, so why invite the whole damn company to Newtown?" Declan looked at the scared-faced former commoner, then said, "The ways of our Lord are sometimes mysterious, but it seems to me that it is rare for him not to have a plan." Leo thought that over for all of 30 seconds before saying, "You know, Declan, you could have just said you don't have any better idea than I do." Declan combined a shrug with a gesture of surrender, causing Leopold to snort back a laugh. Then Leopold added, "On the bright side, while we have no idea what the boss's plan is, we will at least get a decent lunch out of it." Declan thought about that as they gently descended towards Hago before saying, "On that, Leopold, I can state we are indeed in agreement." When they landed, Leopold did so on the grass, leaving the new concrete landing pads clear. They still needed another 21 days for the concrete to fully harden, and he was not about to tell the boss that he'd put a dent in the new landing pads. Once landed, Leopold and Declan led the news crew to Newtown Square. Wyatt was waiting in the square. Tables had been laid complete with tablecloths and clean cutlery. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," said Wyatt. "I understand you have been traveling in a modified barge for 2 weeks, and while I am sure you have had plenty of nutritious food, in my experience such food is often bland and boring. I cannot offer you a grand meal, but the staff at the Checkers Inn have kindly assembled the makings of a buffet for you, much of which comes from the barony itself. Afterwards, I thought you might like to see what progress we have made in just 3 weeks, and you can also observe where some of the money donated by your viewers has gone." The kitchen staff brought out trays with cold slices of roast porcupig and chicken, chunks of cheese, freshly baked bread, hard-boiled eggs, potatoes in their jackets, fresh butter, pickles, mustard, and several vegetables, placing the trays in the middle of each table where people could help themselves. Wyatt said, "I'm told this is a local variation of a farmer's or plowman's lunch that dates back thousands of years. This is the Hago version." As they ate, Joel Sofer, who had positioned himself across the table from Wyatt, asked, "Is this normal food for the inhabitants of Newtown, or was it created especially for us?" Wyatt scratched his head, then said, "I just asked the inn staff if they could come up with an extra 50 or so lunches on very short notice. This was what they suggested. Almost everything, except a couple of the vegetables, is local produce. The butter and cheese come from a local dairy farm where they milk deer. The meat, eggs, and potatoes are all local, and the bread is made in the bakery here on the square using local wheat and rye flour. All of these items are on the inn's menu here. Elsewhere, we have different restaurants, each serving different styles of food, but the inn can serve a lot of people at once, so I brought you here." Joel asked Watt, "When we have finished our lunch, I'd like to film a short piece here in the square. With you, my lord? Then a tour of the town was mentioned?" Wyatt looked at the reporter and said, "Do I call you Mr. News Reporter, or is it Anchor?" Joel looked at Wyatt in confusion, then said, "No, my lord, Joel is sufficient." So Wyatt looked Joel straight in the eyes and said, "I see. Well, Joel, please call me Wyatt. Almost everyone else does, and I'm far more comfortable with it than I am with being called Lord or Baron all of the time." Joel looked into the eyes of the man sitting opposite him and remembered the recording of him stalking the halls of the gallant venture, and a chill ran down his spine. He swallowed, calming himself, then said, "Of course, Wyatt, but I will need to at least introduce you as the Baron." Wyatt let out an almost imperceptible sigh before replying, "That is acceptable." Joel let out his own sigh of relief, then said, "Thank you, Wyatt." Lunch was finished off with apple tart and ice cream, which everybody agreed was delicious. Then Wyatt introduced Rachel, Marcus, and Ino to the news team, and Baronetess Alyssa, asking, "Lady Alyssa, how can we best help out here? You have had a hopefully nice lunch, but I thought you might like to see the progress that these victims of the Drazen are making with their new life in what is to them a new world." A brief discussion was held, and it was agreed that Zelina and Alyssa would each take a camera crew to explore the town, with Rachel and Marcus accompanying Zelina and Ino escorting Alyssa. Wyatt would stick with Joel. Before they left, Wyatt said, "I want to make one thing clear. Just 2 people are living in Newtown that are from Hago. Everyone else is here as a direct result of the Drazen. You can ask them whatever you like about living in Newtown or about me. But please don't ask them about their experiences with the Drazen. I really do not want to hear that anyone was traumatized by such a question." As the rest of the news crews left with Rachel, Marcus, and Ino, a sound technician came over and attached a discreet microphone to Wyatt's uniform. Then Wyatt asked, "So, Joel, what do you want to ask me about?" Joel, with 2 cameramen and a sound recorder, moved to the middle of the square and started the interview. "This is Joel Sofer with the Forentis Grand Informant. We are here in the town square of Newtown in the Barony of the Sreaming Forests, and this is Baron Wyatt Staples himself. Now, the Baron has requested that I call him by his first name, so I suppose my first question to you, Wyatt, is why?" Wyatt smiled, replying, "It's really very simple, Joel. Until a few months ago, I was a commoner. Then more by blind luck than skill, I did some things that brought me to the attention of the prince. He later decided that my actions were sufficient to make me a knight banneret of House Astor, assigned to serve the second princess, Her Royal Highness, Princess Clara Astor. When we came here, I got lucky again. In fact, I think it would be fair to say that we all got lucky, and we managed to defeat the Drazen, saving not only the thousands on board the Drazen cattle ship, the Eternal Garden, but also nearly 2 billion souls here on Hago. To my complete surprise, they not only awarded me some medals, but also increased my rank to Lieutenant Commodore and made me a Baron. So I think that, given I was a commoner for 21 years and a Baron for just coming up to a month, you will understand why I prefer to be addressed as Wyatt rather than my Lord or Baron." Joel carried on saying, "Now tell me, Wyatt, why here and why call it the Barony of the Sreaming Forests?" Wyatt, still smiling, said, "Why here? Well, it's a nice place, but the reality of it is that it's a symbol. The barony itself is mercifully small, but it has historic significance. Over in that direction," he said, gesturing with one arm to the northeast, is the site of the noble house where the rebellion started on Hago 30 years ago. It is also the location where the peace was signed, just about a month ago, both significant acts in the history of Hago. Also, there were no survivors from this area. The Drazen killed them all, so we would not be upsetting any of the existing population by coming here. As for the name, well, to remove the Drazen, we hit them with an orbital attack. Unfortunately, the Drazen had hidden plasma reactors to power their energy needs. When the orbital attacks hit, the reactors shattered, and significant areas of forest burned, taking the Drazen up in flames. Lord Istanel Ferentis, who is an expert on the Drazen, informed me that when they burned, the Drazen produced an audible scream. And so, with Lord Ferentis's permission, I named it the Barony of Sreaming Forests, as a reminder to all as to how we should deal with the Drazen. The smile on Wyatt's face reminded Joel of the sort of expression he had seen on predators right after a kill. He decided to change the subject slightly. Continuing, he said, "Wyatt, you mentioned that Hago has been in revolt for 30 years. Yet I am looking around the square here," he said, gesturing around at the surrounding buildings. And save for what appears to be a ruined railway station, the buildings all appear to be in remarkably good condition. Wyatt laughed at that, then said, "Joel, I said almost the same thing when I first came here. It turns out that the local forestry is mainly made up of a remarkably rot-resistant straight-growing variety, unique to Hago. As I understand it, this timber was once a highly prized export from Hago, and I am sure that General Swallowtail will ensure that it will soon be available again." Joel noted the comment and asked, "But not from your barony?" Wyatt shook his head, then said, "I considered it at first, but then circumstances changed. It turns out that among the survivors of the Drazen, who make up the population of Newtown, there is a large number of craftsmen and artists, both human and Yikanti. As a result, we will not be exporting raw materials. Instead, we will soon be able to supply high-quality handmade pieces, some of which will be available to order, and others will be open to commission, though right now we have more urgent matters to attend to." Joel's mouth had hung open from the moment that Wyatt had mentioned Yikanti, and he only managed to come to his senses as Wyatt finished talking. This was certainly newsworthy, so he queried, "I'm sorry, Wyatt, but did you say you had Yikanti artists?" Wyatt, keen to give praise where he thought it was deserved, said, "Yes, Joel. Amongst the Yikanti held prisoner by the Drazen, there were a small group, just over 100 souls who did not wish to return to the hierarchy for various reasons, but who also felt they were unable to join Principality forces. They asked if it might be possible for them to live within the barony. After consulting with Her Royal Highness, Istanel Ferentis, and General Swallowtail, I agreed to accept them. They will live here with the same rights and responsibilities as the human population." Joel, normally an unflappable news anchor, was now saying, But they're aliens, worthless Xenos and enemies of the Principality." Wyatt glared at Joel, then replied, "No, they are neither worthless nor are they enemies of the Principality. The worst that could be said about them is that they are political refugees from the hierarchy. Mostly they are artists who just wanted to have the freedom to create art. There are also a dozen warriors, some former slaves and some farmers. They also have an architect and an engineer amongst them, both of who have already been incredibly helpful in the 2 weeks they have been here. Why don't I introduce you to them?" Joel stood stunned for almost a minute before yelling, "Cut!" and following Wyatt past the ruins of the station building and through the former rail yard beyond, the crew following on behind. While Wyatt was talking to Joel, Ino was showing Baronetess Alyssa Marshall some of the town. As they walked through the various areas, the camera crew took numerous shots of some of the more unusual buildings. Eventually, they ended up at the souvenir factory, with Ino explaining, "We are producing a small, relatively inexpensive souvenir that anyone, be they commoner or noble, can buy. A limited edition of 1 million. Each will cost just 20 credits, with 10 credits going directly to the barony. The rest goes to whoever transports them and sells them." Ino went into the building and came out with a single tray, showing it to Alyssa and letting the camera crew take several close-ups. Alyssa asked, "What is it made from? I don't recognize this ceramic substance on the top." Ino smiled. "Ah, that's genuine fragments from a Drazen exhaust nozzle. The wood is from one of the numerous burnt trees. As you can see, the top is etched with the date of the battle, Battle of Hastrung, Fandar 1st, 4156, whilst the bottom is etched for the benefit of the survivors of the Eternal Garden. You will note, each is numbered, in this case, number 321,428 of 1 million. When they had finished taking pictures, he took the tray back inside, returning with a box, passing it to Alyssa, saying, "The Baron had these made specially for your team. He said that being dragged out here stuck inside a barge for however long you're going to be here is a lousy assignment. These are just to say thank you for coming." Inside the box were 42 identical souvenirs. The lettering on the top was identical, but on the base, each was etched with the words, "A gift from the Barony of Sreaming Forests to the team from the Ferentis Grand Informant." Ino added, "These are the only 42 that will ever be etched like that, so don't lose them." While this was happening, Marcus and Rachel were talking to Zelina as they watched some of the crew from the Noir Navio paint multiple homes. Zelina asked, "Can you explain what's going on here?" Marcus raised his eyebrows and looked as if he was about to make an impolite comment, when Rachel interrupted. "These houses are the ones where the orphans are living. We have over 100. The town took a vote and agreed that we would fix up the children's homes first. Now some of these children were actually on board the Noir Navio during the main battle. We are not permitted to know the details, as they involve a classified mission. However, when Wyatt went to ask for volunteers to help decorate their homes, he was hoping for maybe 50 crewmen. He actually got almost 600, so as not to leave the vessel undermanned, Her Royal Highness, Princess Clara, has permitted almost 200 per day to visit on alternating days, in return for 6 hours of house painting. The teams get a few hours on the beach at the end of the day, some beers and a barbecue. By the end of today, 2/3 of the children's houses will be painted." Zelina took the camera crew over to the nearest home being painted and talked to those doing the work, saying, "Excuse me, I'm Zelina from the Ferentis Grand Informant. Could you give us a few minutes to let everyone know why you're doing this work?" 3 of the crew, 2 men and a woman, put down the paintbrushes and turned to talk to her. The first, a younger man, said, "They're just kids. I've got a younger sister at home. I'd like to think that if anything bad were to happen to her, some people would step up and help. The time on the beach later will be nice as well, though." The woman, a tough-looking soldier type, was next. She said, "I was one of those who boarded the cattle ship. I saw stuff you would not believe. Let's just say this is my way of saying sorry we didn't get there sooner." Finally, the older man said, "I'm a maintenance technician. 3 of those young kids ran into a burning room and dragged me out. Some of them got burned badly doing so. Yeah, no way was I not going to help pay off some of that debt." Zelina and the camera crew took some more footage, then walked back to Marcus and Rachel and asked, "So where are the children now?" Rachel replied, "It's a school day. Would you like to see?" Wyatt was in the train yard with Joel. They were standing next to a long, flat concrete slab, watching as a Yikanti and 3 young humans placed markings on the concrete surface. Wyatt walked over to the Yikanti, then turned to the camera and Joel, who nodded to the cameramen. "This," said Wyatt, "is Eben. He is our Yikanti architect, and he has designed the new building that will cover our sawmill. As you can see, we have a mill set up here that can saw trees up to 30 meters in length, but currently, we have only the important parts, such as the saw and the log scanner, covered by simple temporary covers." Wyatt pointed to 2 large, open-ended frames covered with some white plastic material. "These prevent water damage, but we want to enclose everything with a large roof to protect it. Eben here has come up with a clever design which allows us to use freshly cut green or unseasoned timber to form a self-supporting framework on which we can place a lightweight but strong cover. I'll ask Eben to explain further." Eben came forward with his datapad and explained that with numerous very thin, flexible beams bolted together into a grid and simple metal brackets, they would build a lightweight, self-supporting shell that did not require any internal support beams or columns. Instead of simple flat shapes forming a set of walls with an angled roof, they would get a long, organic, curved form made from far lighter materials, and that he and the technicians were currently marking out each point where the brackets would be bolted to the slab. He pulled up rendered images on his datapad to show Joel and the cameras just what the structure would look like when finished. After they finished filming and were walking away with the cameras off, Joel turned to Wyatt and said, "I'm sorry. I thought the Akanti were arrogant and hated us." Eben was polite, clearly clever, and explained everything in a way that almost everyone can understand. Wyatt nodded, saying, "Well, you have seen some construction. Perhaps now I should show you one more project where we are working with existing facilities on Hago to produce something new." They walked back to the far side of the square and through the arch to where the brand-new electric transport vehicle was waiting. While Wyatt was doing this, Marcus and Rachel had taken Zelina and her crew to visit the school. Marcus said, "You can film the classes briefly. Still, please don't interrupt the lessons." Inside, they found 4 classes in progress. Downstairs, they found one class teaching basic maths and another teaching English. At the same time, upstairs, they observed 2 art classes taking place. In one, some of the older children were drawing and painting with Elizabeth Swallowtail, while in the other, a young Yakanti and 2 human helpers were showing the children how to make simple clay bowls. Outside in the courtyard, Zelina interviewed Rachel, asking, "Can you explain to our viewers what we just witnessed?" Rachel replied, "As you know, teachers must be nobles. Unfortunately, we had no nobles with such skills in the survivors on the Eternal Garden who were willing to remain here on Hago. We do, however, have quite a lot of teaching assistants who we have pressed into service teaching basic skills. Unfortunately, we are desperately short of anyone who can teach more advanced skills. I can teach more advanced math skills, but that's all. Wyatt Baron Staples would like to appeal to any teacher who might be willing to volunteer to come here and teach. We can afford to provide a basic salary, but we will also provide you with a free home, good food, and children who are not just willing, but eager to learn." Rachel paused for a moment, then added, "We are also in need of a doctor. We have many medical technicians and nurses with plenty of experience, but we need someone willing to supervise. If there is any doctor out there who would be willing to come to a war-torn world and help us, you will find us grateful." With that, the camera crews packed up and returned to the square along with Zelina. The final short interview in Hago was carried out at the electric vehicle plant. Here, once again, Joel, after a short briefing, interviewed Wyatt. They started outside the factory, with Joel asking, "So Wyatt, this vehicle we have come here on looks new. Can you tell us about it?" Wyatt replied, "Well, Joel, when we arrived here, we discovered they had a small electric vehicle factory. This particular vehicle is indeed new. In fact, it's less than a week old. We followed instructions left behind and used stock already on the shelves in the factory to build it." Joel responded, "I see, but is this all you will be building?" Wyatt answered, "No, Joel. While we will continue to build these electric vehicles, which are highly practical but have limited range, we are working on something new. Please follow me." Wyatt led them to another building and opened the door. Inside, a large 8-wheeled vehicle stood in an unfinished state. Wyatt went on, "Here is a new project. We have taken the chassis of an existing armored vehicle and turned it into a civilian all-terrain vehicle. This particular one will be destined for our foresters, and as you can see, has not yet received its final paint job, just its red primer. Nor has it had all the fittings added. We hope that there might be interest in it for the civilian market. It's a tough go-anywhere design with 8-wheel steering, which means it can actually turn around in just over its own length, making it ideal as a support vehicle, or an all-terrain ambulance. Or perhaps there are some nobles who might like it fitted out in luxury materials for taking on a hunt. Once we have finished development, we will make it available for general sale. This is a potential collaboration with General Swallowtail, taking the chassis of a military vehicle produced here and giving it a civilian use." The camera crew finished recording and returned to the square, where Wyatt asked if there was anything else they needed. The news director, Baronetess Alyssa Marshall, said, "Thank you, Wyatt. It has been most informative, but I was wondering, would you be willing to allow us to return, perhaps regularly, so we could film progress? As you are aware, we got many donations from the brief coverage we gave to the story before. I think we could do a series showing the reconstruction of Hago, which might bring in a lot more support, both financial and actual. Perhaps finding people who will come here to offer skills you are lacking?" Wyatt replied, "Thank you, Baronetess Alyssa. Would you allow me to contact you later today with my reply to that?" I'd like to speak with General Swallowtail, my council and Her Royal Highness, to consider the implications of such an offer. In the meantime, my knight Sir Leopold will take you to interview General Swallowtail." Alyssa nodded her head and said, "Thank you, Baron Staples, for allowing us to film so much, and for the gifts as well as the lunch. We shall look forward to hearing from you." Leopold waited until everyone was aboard the shuttle, then transported the news people to General Swallowtail's headquarters, leaving the two news anchors and their camera and sound crews before returning to the Forentis Grand Informant media barge, where everyone else got off. Then he returned to the Navio. General Swallowtail was waiting to greet them, forewarned by Wyatt over the radio. As Zelina and Joel exited the shuttle, followed by their camera crew, it took them a moment to realize that the older man in fatigues had a star on each collar. They approached him saying, "Good afternoon, General, we're from—" Tornell interrupted them. "Yes, I know. The Forentis Grand Informant, so what do you want with me then?" Joel answered, "Well, sir, we were hoping you might give us an interview, perhaps tell us of your situation, maybe even what your hopes are for the future. Baron Staples even mentioned needing certain people, such as a doctor and some teachers. Our story will be broadcast throughout Forentis territory. We hope that if it's regarded as interesting enough, it might be picked up by other networks in the Principality." Tornell pretended to consider, leaving them in silence for 2 full minutes. In reality, he had already agreed with Wyatt and Princess Clara that it was potentially a good idea, but he also knew, as a general, that letting the press get involved with the military could lead to problems. Finally, after the 2 minutes were up, he said, "Very well. You can have your interview, but I want to see it before it goes out, and I want to try and get it broadcast to Hygo. Most people probably don't have working screens anymore, but some will. This could help the population know what is happening." Zelina asked, "Do you have a datapad, sir? We could send you a copy in advance that way." Tornell smiled as he replied, "As it happens, I was recently gifted a very nice datapad by Baron Staples, so that will not be a problem. Now then, do you want to do the interview inside or outside? We probably have 2 more hours of daylight left." After looking at the sorry state of the interiors of the available buildings, the technician suggested that the best place for an interview would indeed be outside. And so General Tornell Swallowtail answered their questions. He explained that truthfully most people were tired of the great experiment, that having to deal with pirates for their off-world supplies had always resulted in their being worse off, how the indiscriminate murder of countless minor nobles and their bastards had made things even worse, because they had murdered teachers, doctors, engineers, and many others. And whilst they had managed to keep things running using mechanics and technicians and medics, that lack of skilled people had resulted in great suffering. He talked about the Drazen arrival, how they had shown up in force and started taking groups of people, completely emptying many isolated towns and villages, how the Navio had bombarded the Drazen bases from orbit, leaving only isolated concentrations and the occasional straggler on the surface of Hygo. In the 3 weeks since the treaty, they had hunted them down. They obliterated every concentration of Drazan they could find, admitting that there were likely still individuals or very small groups of Drazan still on the surface of Hygo, but stating they wouldn't stop until every last one of them had been removed. Finally, he talked about the deal that had been struck with House Forentis under guidance from House Astor, how that over the next 5 years he wanted to find the best and brightest people on the planet to become the new nobles. Not because they could lead, but because they wanted to do their best for the people, saying, "We had nobles that inherited their titles that were assigned here, and that didn't work. Then we overthrew them, but we just got a lot of people who claimed to want the people to be better off, but mostly just looked after themselves. That didn't work either. Perhaps we will be luckier this time around. All we can do is try." After they discussed the aid House Forentis was providing, Tornell remarked that, "Actually, whilst we are very grateful for the medical aid that arrived last week, it was Baron Staples' actions that saved almost 100 critically injured troops, and thousands of less seriously injured were helped by the medical technicians and nurses he sent to the surface." At the end of the interview, they talked about rebuilding Hygo and making it a better place, what they needed to do to achieve that, and what viewers could do to help if they wanted to. Tornell explained that aid from House Forentis would be incredibly helpful. Still, It would only really help with the big projects, and Baron Staples had suggested that, rather than just giving out donations to the most in need, they would split the money, with half going to pay for critical projects. The other half would fund long-term projects and businesses, with loans paid off over time and deposited into a pot to continue funding projects far into the future. When they finally finished the interview an hour after they had arrived, Tornell called Wyatt, who came to pick the news crew up and return them to orbit before he, too, returned to the Nor Navio, for dinner followed by some sleep. It had been a long day, and he realized there was still much to do before the ship had to leave.